Hello, everybody. Dan D. Federicis from Saratoga Report, and I'm here with Chris Mathiesen, candidate for mayor on the One Saratoga line. I'm pretty excited about this because we've prepped for this. We've talked online here, we've talked on the phone, we've texted, and we're going to have, I think, an engaging and an interesting interview here. Chris, thanks for joining. I should say this is sponsored content. It's paid for by your campaign friends of Chris Mathiesen, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
just
Mathiesen
wanted
for mayor. Yeah.
Mathiesen for mayor. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. And first of all, how you let me give a brief intro. You've had a number of positions here in city government. Most notably, you were commissioner of public safety from 2012 to 2017.
Yes.
You are now a retired dentist. You practice dentistry in the city with, I don't know, I got to say hundreds or maybe into the thousands of patients over the years of Saratoga
residents. So. It wouldn't have been a very successful practice if it was just hundreds.
Okay.
So we saw thousands of patients over the years. Yes.
Okay. And you're married. You and your wife jointly raised 5 children. You have 6 grandchildren.
Yes, we raised our 5 kids in a blended family.
Okay.
And yes, so now we have 6 grandchildren, and 2 of them were local. So we see them a lot. Unfortunately, the other 4 we don't see as frequently, but we'd like to. We enjoy seeing them when we do.
Yeah, I feel bad for the grandparents that have grandkids in Seattle or something.
I know. At least the ones who are in driving distance, they're getting older now. Their schedules are getting so busy that they don't have time for us the way they used to. So.
That's funny. Hey, so you're here you are. You are running for mayor of Saratoga Springs on the One Saratoga line.
Correct.
And you are a registered Democrat, and
yes,
you've been a lifelong.
I lost the primary in June. On June 27th, okay. I got about 40% of the vote, but I did go through the primary process, which I thought was a good thing.
Okay, and you are it's a 3-way race.
Yes.
John Safford, Mayor Ron Kim, and you, John Safford, on the Republican line. Mayor Kim has the 2 lines. He's got the Democrats and working families, and you got the One Saratoga. Yes. Let's go into this. Tell the voters why you're running for mayor of Saratoga Springs.
Okay. After I retired from dentistry, I had a lot more time in my hands, and so city government had always interested me. And so I started attending city council meetings and started paying more attention to what was going on. And so I had been a big supporter of Ron Kim. Ron Kim was an old friend of mine, although he denies that he was an old friend of mine, but he was always an old friend of mine. And we always supported each other. He always supported me when I was running for office. And so I was very surprised at some of the things that I was seeing. And at first I was certainly willing to give him some time to get acclimated to the position, because it takes a lot to get used to, especially mayor. There are a lot of responsibilities that people don't really quite grasp until they're actually in the position. But I was surprised at some of the things he was doing. I was surprised at some of the measures of other council members that he was supporting. And so in the summer of 2022, some people came up to me and asked me if I might consider running. I had been making some comments at city council meetings and also on John Kaufman's blog. And I think people saw that and thought maybe it would be time for me to consider running for mayor. I gave it some thought. And towards the end of 2022, I decided that I would. So I threw my hat in the ring. And I did speak to the chair of the Republican Party at one point in time about the possibility of running with their backing. And I just decided that since I'd always been a Democrat, it would probably be better to run through the primary in June instead of take the Republican line, although I have great respect for the Republican Party, and I have great respect for Mike Brandy. I think he's a really nice guy, and I think he's trying to do the best he can to resurrect the Republican Party in Saratoga Springs. I grew up in Saratoga Springs. I've moved here when I was 3.5. And most of the time that I've been here, the Republican Party was by far the dominant party. And, most of my friends are Republicans. My father's a Republican. I've gotten along with the Republicans all my life. We have differences in terms of perspective. But when it comes to local politics and local issues, party politics aren't really as important. And so I really think that, I can appeal to people of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, as well as people who are not affiliated, because I think I have the background that the other candidates don't have, and I think I have the perspective that they don't have. They can't have, because they haven't been here as long as I have. They haven't served in as many positions as I have. And I think that I would just be the better candidate. I had to tell you one other thing. Since I retired, I really love my life. It's been really wonderful, and having this time to myself, and being able to go to the gym and doing all these things. And so, I was really torn when the idea came up of me running for mayor. And my wife was really torn too, but we both decided that it was something that was important. And so here I am.
Good. You're enjoying your retirement, and if you win, it's gonna end with a thud, right?
Well, it won't really end with a thud, because I think people need to realize all these five council positions rely very heavily on their full-time deputies, and so it's not as if you're going to be in the office from 9 to 5. No mayor has done that. No council person has done that. Skip Schlagel came pretty close, but most people, have other positions too, and that's okay. That's part of the reason why it's not a salary that's commensurate with a full-time position. It's more realistic. Although I think one of the things I didn't mention when we were talking about issues, I do think that the salaries for members of the council need to be upgraded. They were set. The $14,500 was set in around 2001, and never increased from that point on in time. I think at the very least, you need to take that figure and adjust it for the times we're in today, which would bring it up to about $25,000.
Still a modest amount.
It's still a modest amount, but I think that 14.5 is really it gets more ridiculous every year. So
I'd like to see all the candidates talk to that and agree on that, because I think it does not serve the city well.
I know. And so my last year on the council in 2017, I knew I was leaving, and so I made the suggestion to the other council members that this would be a good time to talk about increasing the salaries for the next term. So it wouldn't affect me at all. I wouldn't have benefited from it, but I really thought it was something that needed to be considered. And at the time I was suggesting, I had calculated about 22.5, and members of the council were shy. They shied away from it, and I think they felt that if you bring that up, then the voters are going to revolt. I think voters will understand that these salary levels are way too low and not realistic.
And the way to do it, if you have to, is make it effective 2 years from
yes,
the
exactly.
date.
Yeah,
and therefore nobody's
for subsequent
really
council
sitting
members.
term.
Exactly, not for yourself. You're right. Yeah. That's why I was suggesting that in 2017 as I was leaving.
You've got some good ideas, some goals for your first term. Should the voters elect you as mayor, you want to touch on some of those?
Well, again, because having been on the city council for so long and having observed city government for so long, I do, and having been here for so long, one of my top goals would be to improve connectivity for bicycles and for pedestrians in the city. We were just talking before about the fact that we live in Friar Tuck Way, which is off of Outer Grand Avenue. And for years and years and years, especially when my kids were getting older and wanting to take their bikes into the city, I'm a warrior, and I was really not thrilled because Grand Avenue, Outer Grand Avenue, is very narrow. People speed. People are just not aware of the fact, apparently, that they're sharing that road surface with pedestrians and bike people. We did the Geyser Road Trail, which was a great thing, and it certainly improved quality of life for people in Geyser Crest. But as our council was nearing completion on that, I was suggesting over and over again that now, once that's done, and I think it was finished in 2018 after I left the council, that it was time to look at other parts of the west side of the city. Grand Avenue and Pine Road and Kirby Road very definitely needs better pedestrian access. It's terrible. And again, that's a quality of life issue. I think it would make those areas a lot more walkable, but make it a lot easier for kids to walk to school, for people to be able to walk without having to drive every place they go, and to be able to do so safely. So that's important. The Caroline Street School was built in the early 50s. I lived behind it, so I remember it very well. I lived behind it over on Fifth Avenue. And Benton Drive and MacArthur Drive and Iroquois and Salem all developed from between the 50s and the mid 60s. And yet Caroline Street never had any sidewalks from Schuyler Drive east for kids to walk to school. Finally, this year, a sidewalk is going in. All these years later, why did it take so long to take care of a problem that should have been very obvious to everybody, that kids were not able to walk safely to school over all those years? It's many, many years that they ignored those problems. And so these are quality of life issues. There's money out there now because of the infrastructure bill to do these kinds of things. So these are the kinds of things that we need to look at. It's also true. Some of the streets around the high school were not walkable. They didn't have sidewalks. They're finally putting sidewalks in on Lower Grand Avenue, near in the vicinity of the high school. It makes an awful lot of sense, but it should have been done years and years ago. So connectivity is important. My next topic was to continue to work towards an earlier last call for alcohol sales. And that's something that I picked up.
Let me stop you there. Let me stop you there. That's a bold campaign theme. So this is important. So I want to just stop and acknowledge that. Good for you for not just saying the easy ones, right? Because you're going to upset some people with this one. So you're going to please.
Yeah, but it's not bold for me because it's something that I was talking about for years. In fact, it would be. I can't imagine if I didn't bring this up. I think people need to remember how this all came about. There was a death in 2010 on a St. Patrick's Day night. A person who I knew really well was killed because there was a fight and someone basically ran over him with his car. And the other thing was that I was becoming more and more aware of some of the altercations on Caroline Street because of the number of patients who were coming to my office with broken teeth and facial lacerations and things of that sort, all resulting from altercations that were happening on Caroline Street. So when I decided to run in 2011, I started getting up at about 2:45 in the morning on like late Saturday night, early Sunday morning, just go down and watch and see what was happening. And I did it week after week after week because it was just so eye-opening and so stunning to see what happens to Saratoga Springs during those hours. It's so different. I continue to encourage anybody, especially during the warm weather months, to go down and see what happens when you have so much alcohol and so much testosterone in the mix and what can happen. It is outrageous. It's out of control. When I got into office in 2012, I went down to the SLA. I talked to them. They are very supportive of us having an earlier last call. Caroline Street is so unique because there are so many bars on top of each other. That is like statewide. There's nothing quite like Caroline Street. And the situation becomes very unbearable very quickly. Before our surveillance cameras went in, the city was turning, every time you turn around, there was another lawsuit against the city because people were insisting that the cops that they were interacting with were assaulting them. And the city was saying, no, they didn't assault them. The person was assaulting the cop. And we finally put the surveillance cameras up to be able to get a better idea of exactly what's happening. And the number of lawsuits went way down. That was something Marilyn Rivers suggested. Marilyn Rivers, who works so closely with Travelers Insurance, who's no longer with the city, which is sad because that's something that Mayor Kim handled poorly regarding Marilyn Rivers. She was a real asset to the city, and she's no longer with us in the city. But that was something that was happening on Caroline Street that was so out of control. And so when I started going down, I started to get a real sense of how bad things were. In fact, just looking at the fright on some of the faces of the cops who were trying to deal with these crowds, you got a real sense of how scary it was. Our downtown is a real asset. People from all over now are moving into our downtown. Actually, they're condos and apartments. It's a desirable place to be. It certainly is a destination with all the restaurants, the conventions, the destination weddings, not even talking about what happens in the summertime when we have the track and SPAC. It's a great place to be. So downtown Saratoga Springs is such a success story. And why jeopardize that by undermining the reputation of our downtown as a safe and fun place to be? It's no longer safe and fun after 2 a.m. It gets out of control, and that's something that needs to be done.
And to clarify, that's the time you would specify as 2 a.m.
Well, my first proposal was 3 a.m. because I thought it was a compromise. When we went to the county, because it has to be a countywide determination. I went to the county, asked them.
That was my next question, Chris. If you could, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but if you
Sure.
could delineate or outline how you would get over that gigantic mountain of the county not cooperating on this.
I will. Yes, I will. All right. Let me tell you what happened. Yeah, I went to the county, and they gave me my 5 minutes to speak, and I got no support from anyone on the county board of supervisors except for Joanne Yepsen. She was the only person who accepted the fact that we needed an early last call, and so I was pushing for 3 a.m. So we were shut down, and obviously we continue to have problems on Caroline Street. It's never gotten better. Some years they're worse than others. The police have actually done a good job of patrolling it. They have increased their patrols. During the time that I was in office, Paul Veach came up with a really good plan to increase the police presence on Caroline Street, and that really did help, I have to say. There weren't as many incidents, and it did help, but it was still really out of control, and it requires a lot of police time in order to keep things under control, which is expensive. It really is. After we were shut down, Warren County considered a 3 a.m. close, and Warren County approved it. And the police chief in Glens Falls said the number of calls that they had, especially on South Street, went down over 30% once they went from 4 a.m. to 3 a.m. After that, Essex County changed their last call from 4 to 3. And they also found in Lake Placid that the number of calls went way down. And in fact, the police chief of Lake Placid said that he would like to bring their last call down to 2 a.m. so it would be consistent with Clinton County and be even safer. 4 a.m. is just too late. So there you are.
What do you say to those that disagree with you and point out that a lot of these horrible occurrences on Caroline Street, not all of them certainly, but a lot of them happen before 2 a.m. So they may say, well, what are you accomplishing here?
Well, I think that the best thing to do is get up in the morning, early in the morning, and get up and go down at 1 o'clock and take a look and see what you see. And then go another day, go at 2 o'clock, and then 3, and then 4. You'll see a vast difference. Things get incrementally worse over a period of over those hours. It's kind of like the Supreme Court when they were talking about pornography. I know it when I see it, kind of thing. The casual observer can't miss the fact that there's something really outrageously wrong by the time you get to 4 a.m. It's just out of control. You get the really, really heavy drinkers who tend to get violent. It's a real mess, and it's correctable. And most of the counties in the state do not have a 4 a.m. last call. They survive. If you try to get a 4 a.m. liquor license in New York City, good luck at that, because most neighborhoods will have more control over that in New York. And most of the licenses are for 2 a.m. now, not 4 a.m.
Is this one of your top 3 goals?
Oh, I have lots of goals, but it certainly is something that I would follow through on. I want to look for other ways of bringing this about. I'd like to bring our state legislators down to Caroline Street to have them see what's going on, because it is unique. The SLA agrees. This is a unique situation.
What? Can I transition here? Oh,
sure.
Sure. I've got, we traded notes. You gave me some notes of things you want to talk about. And three of the categories have us have a similar issue. I'm going to read: restore order, civility, and decorum during council meetings,
Yes, that's a
and the
good one.
chaos.
Yeah.
And this is kind of a related issue, at least some would argue. Concerns about Mayor Kim's judgment on many issues. Do you want
Yes.
to talk to any of those and all of those?
Well, I mean, um, this is how I got here. When I was attending these meetings, and when I walked into the city council chambers and realized that the city had no city attorney, that the Mayor Kim started his year off with no city attorney. He asked Vince Leonardis and Tony Izzo, who had been in the city as an assistant city attorney for like 35 years or 36 years, to resign and not to continue. And so he went through all of January and part of February without a city attorney. It was pretty chaotic from what I've heard. Very poor decision. And eventually he went back to Tony Izzo, who graciously agreed to come back as a city attorney, but he worked alone for years, for over a year, I think. Then they eventually appointed Mike Phillips as the assistant city attorney. But that's unprecedented. We've always needed a city attorney, and as things have gotten busier over the years, the role of assistant city attorney has become more important too. That was a very bad idea. I thought that his decision to try to undermine the work of Marilyn Rivers we were just talking about Marilyn Rivers, was a very bad idea. Marilyn Rivers had saved the city hundreds of thousands of dollars because of her guidance. She's an accredited risk management manager. She has great respect across the state. She was worth her weight in gold, and he decided that he was going to pull her out of the accounts department where she had been working for years and working very successfully for years, but interacting with all the departments in the city, and put her in his department under the guidance of the city attorney. Reasons for that, I don't know. Those are the kinds of things I think you don't make major decisions on how you're going to run a department until you've been in office for a while. I think that was really premature. I think it was poor judgment. The other thing, he supported.
Is she still in the city? Do I recall
No,
that
she's
correctly?
gone. She retired, and I've been told she would have stayed longer had she not been mistreated. So
There's no lawsuit by her. I lost. To be honest with you,
there is a lawsuit. Yes.
Okay.
There is a lawsuit. And then the other thing, when Commissioner Montanillo, who was brand new in his position, decided that he was going to eliminate the position of assistant police chief. Now, the police department hierarchy was reorganized during my administration. Actually, the position of captain was eliminated. There was more specific duties given to all the lieutenants. All the lieutenants had certain areas of responsibility, and the assistant chief was given more responsibility because there was no longer a captain as well as the chief. This was something that Greg Veach and John Cotone came up with, and it worked really well. It was a really good revision in terms of the hierarchy and the management of the police department. For someone to come in and make that sudden change, I think was a very bad idea without understanding how the department works. And Mayor Kim, a former Commissioner of Public Safety, supported Commissioner Montanillo's decision. In fact, I think that was around the time he insisted that Commissioner Montanillo was the finest commissioner we had ever had. Obviously, they have different feelings about each other at this point in time, but that was his comment. I just felt really badly for the person who had been appointed to the assistant chief position, a really qualified guy who was knocked back down to lieutenant. Again, you don't walk into a department and start making drastic changes until you understand how the department works. And Ron Kim should have known that. I disagreed with him last November when he and Commissioner Montanillo decided that they were going to release information regarding the shooting on Broadway, the corner of Broadway and Caroline, after the DA had talked to them and asked them not to. In the past, the police department and the DA had always worked very, very closely in terms of when to release information on various things. Obviously, the DA has to take responsibility for prosecutions, etc., and it should be up to the DA, a duly elected person, to make that decision. And they decided they were going to go ahead anyway. I just
the two of them cited transparency being so important.
Transparency is important, and I couldn't agree more. But I don't think anybody's been accusing the DA or the police department of not being transparent in the past, and we can touch on some of those issues too. But our department has always been very transparent. But there
I agree. Don't get me wrong. I absolutely agree with you.
Yeah.
With the prosecution and the district attorney, and then there was continuing tensions, maybe deeper than that, going forward from that point. And so I agree with you. I just want to give a fair devil's advocate kind of thing that they said this.
Yes, they did. But there are ways of being transparent without releasing so many details at that point in time. Yes, you want to reassure the public that this wasn't a gangland thing or things of that sort. I understand that, but you can do that without going into great detail. And I'm sure that DA Hagan would have had no objection whatsoever if they had given a general statement, but also included in the statement that more information will be released as the investigation continues. The investigation at the time was in infancy. So that made no sense at all to me. That's a judgment call. And that was very, very poor judgment, I thought.
And I do agree. I just want to make sure we fleshed out all the our counter arguments and so forth.
And then we go into 2023, and we start 2023 with the issue of the senior center and what was going to be done with the senior center, and using the senior center as a low barrier shelter, and the tension between Ron Kim and the head of the senior center, the head of Shelters of Saratoga. Shelters of Saratoga is a great organization. They've done so much for the community and so much for people in the community. And they're so effective, and they deserve so much respect. And Shelters of Saratoga apparently decided that a low barrier shelter is a very complicated entity to be able to manage. And they decided that it was too much for them. And so they decided that they were going to bow out of any idea that this was going to be something that they would be running as a low barrier shelter. Some of the comments that Mayor Kim made about Shelters of Saratoga, I thought were unfair and just not and unwise. Then he went on to criticize the parents of Saratoga Central Catholic kids, because he questioned their Catholic values, because they were concerned about the low barrier shelter being basically on property immediately adjacent to the campus of the Saratoga Central Catholic School. Well, I'm an alumnus of St. Peter's Academy, which is now Saratoga Central Catholic School, and I was on the board of trustees a few years ago of that school, and I know how careful they are in terms of maintaining, a sense of safety for the kids there. They need to maintain their enrollment. Parents certainly have every right to be concerned about for the safety of their kids, and to have those parents criticized for a lack of their Catholic values over that issue, I think that, again, that was a very, very poor decision on Ron Kim's part. Then there's the emails that showed up with the F-bomb over and over again. I would think that an attorney would know that you don't put things like that in writing. And of course, then there was a temper tantrum
and not use the F-bomb in those situations, regardless of whether they're in writing or not.
Of course. And then there was the temper tantrum in City Hall. It was captured on camera. And again, that's not behavior that is at all consistent with what I think should be the demeanor of the mayor of the city of Saratoga Springs. Then there are the February 7th and the May 2nd city council meetings that could not be continued because of disruption from the members of the audience. There were people in the audience who were activists from Black Lives Matter. I have great respect for the intentions of Black Lives Matter. I think Black lives do matter. In fact, I have a piece on that going out soon. But the behavior of some of the activists during city council meetings is really uncalled for. And not only did Ron Kim not try to quell that, but I think there were in many instances he was actually encouraging it. So I've never seen anything quite like that. On the night of February 7th, I know members of the public who were attending that night really felt unsafe. And I had heard of people who say they'll never go to a city council meeting again because of that.
If you were mayor that evening,
yes, and that's the thing, man. I go to a lot of city council meetings, so I've experienced a lot of these incidents. So I was there on February 7th, and I was there on May 2nd. And if you look at these meetings through the video transcripts, you don't really capture what's really happening. On February 7th, most of the action that was taking place off to the side. The person who was trying to disrupt the meeting and basically was successful in taking control of the meeting was off to the side, and you didn't really see what was actually happening. But it was pretty outrageous. It really was. And
can I interrupt you?
I'm not a fan of Commissioner Montanino. I don't support him. I think that he made some major mistakes, but I do think that he did the right thing in trying to hold a person responsible for that behavior in the most gentle way possible. In some instances, the most gentle way possible of doing so. I certainly agree. I think that he was doing the right thing, and for him to be labeled a sexist and a racist for doing that is very hard for me to understand. And it's very hard for me to understand why other members of the council would characterize him as such, and why Mayor Kim would allow that. You need to have mutual respect on the city council.
Can I ask you to differentiate yourself from Mayor Kim? If Mayor Mathiesen was sitting in that chair that night, how would you have handled that meeting May 2nd, or the series of meetings? How would you handle these problems and disruptions differently?
We have certain criteria that people are supposed to follow during the city council meetings. And for public comment, people are supposed to come in. They're supposed to give their name and their address, which the activists tend not to do, and to speak to the council, not to the public, and to speak within a certain period of time. Ron Kim has moved that from 2 minutes to 4 minutes, which I think I would probably bring it back to 2 minutes. But anyway, that's a different issue. You need to, and people who are not going to abide by those regulations. This is a business meeting. You're being allowed to speak, but you don't have the right to continue on and disrupt the meeting. And so people who are not abiding by those principles need to be removed. People who are using bad language need to be removed. People who are shouting over their other people need to be advised that they should not be doing so, which Ron Kim never does. He lets them shout and scream. He thinks that's free speech. It's not. You're abusing the free speech of other people, and you're abusing the rights of other people when you speak over them. I think you really need to reestablish that kind of order. And people who are not going to abide by that need to be removed. Now, on the flip side of that, I think that the Black Lives Matter people really do feel that their points of view are not being addressed and not being heard. And I do think that there are better ways of making sure that their points of view are heard, not during a city council meeting, but when I was Commissioner of Public Safety, we had a lot of forums where we were able to bring all parts of the public safety department to the table and invite residents to come in and speak to us freely. There was give and take, which you don't have during a council meeting. And I think that there are a lot of things that you can reestablish in terms of trust and in terms of making sure that people are heard on both sides of issues without disrupting city council meetings. I really do think that we need more forums in order for people to discuss some of the issues that people are bringing up regarding Black Lives Matter and regarding police conduct and things of that sort. Actually, Commissioner Montanino did have a forum a week ago, 2 weeks ago. It was a good idea. I did it like 3 times a year, but it was a good idea. And there was some disruption, and but it was okay because it wasn't a city council meeting, and people got their thoughts, their feelings expressed. But I thought most people did so pretty respectfully, and it was a positive experience. And that's a much better way of doing things.
Well, if you recall, that is a requirement on the 50-point plan, and this was to fulfill that requirement.
Yeah, we need to talk about the 50-point plan, but we probably shouldn't do that here.
We can do that another time. I'd like to delve into some of these subjects.
Because there are some things in the 50-point plan that I think we need to. Well, again, that's something that, for a different day to discuss in an open forum. Absolutely, I think the entire community needs to sit down and go through the 50-point plan. But I think that there are some points that are made in that plan that need to be clarified at the very least.
Okay, excellent. I've got a couple other notes here on things you maybe wanted to talk about, and we just talked about public forums. Perhaps is the short-term rentals.
Short-term rentals. So, when I was in office, I think it was in 2015 or 2016, some people started coming to my office to express their concern about what was happening to their neighborhoods. Salem Drive and Monroe Street in particular were two areas of the city where people were quite concerned about the short-term rentals in their neighborhoods. Again, a short-term rental, we're talking about residential buildings where nobody's residing, that these are basically commercial uses of residential buildings, and no one actually resides there, and on a regular basis they are rented out to people for short-term usage, short-term rentals. That's different from somebody, of course, Saratoga Springs, we're used to people renting their houses out in August, and we're the racing season. That's very common and no big deal at all. But those are the situations where people actually reside in those houses most of the year. The short-term rentals are just being used for certain periods, but not for the entire year. And there actually are residents there. That's a residential use. These are not residential uses. These are commercial uses in a residential zone. And I think there's a real problem with that. And I think it's not consistent with our zoning ordinance. And I think that's the way to go. There are certain parts of the city, you are one, you are one, you are two, you are three, SR1, SR2, and rural residential. I think those areas should not have any short-term rentals at all. It undermines neighborhood character. We live in a neighborhood where people know each other. They watch out for each other. They know who's in the neighborhood. If there's something going on that they think is not right, they make note of it. These are all very positive things. As you
let me clarify you. Let me just clarify, just so we're talking off the same sheet of music. When you say they should not have short-term rentals, you mean exclusive buildings that are exclusively for short-term rentals, but the family that wants to rent it for 2 weeks during track season and put some money in the pocket, that's still okay, right? Is that what you're saying?
Fine. I've lived with that all my life. That's fine. Saratogians need to understand that that's always part of our city. People renting their places out, especially in the summertime. That's fine. If somebody wants to go to Europe,
exclusively for short-term rentals.
Somebody wants to go to Europe and they want to rent their house out for 2 weeks. It's almost like house sharing. That's no big deal at all. Sure. I'm talking about a residential building where no one lives. There is no resident there. There's no permanent resident there at all. It's owned by someone else, not living there, and it's being used continuously for short-term rentals. That's a commercial use. That's not a residential use. There's no residential.
Sure, I fully understand it, and
that undermines neighborhood character. That becomes a real problem for the character of the neighborhood. It drives up the cost of housing because people make a lot of money off these short-term rentals, and it drives the costs up, and it reduces the number of housing units available to a family trying to move into Saratoga Springs. And something that I was thinking about the other day, because we have a short-term rental in our neighborhood. And I was thinking about the value of the residences on either side of that house. If you were looking at two houses in Saratoga that you were considering buying, and one of them was in a neighborhood where there were no short-term rentals, and the other one had a short-term rental next to it, which would you pick? You'd pick the one that didn't have a short-term rental next to it because you don't know what to expect weekend after weekend. You don't even know who's going to be there, what's going to happen. So it's going to have I would think does have a detrimental effect on the houses, the housing values of the properties next, immediately adjacent to the short-term rentals. It just isn't fair to people who have invested their hard-earned funds into their homes, and suddenly the next thing they know, they have a short-term rental next door. It's affecting the value of their house. It's not fair, and so we really need to restrict it to certain parts of the city, but not the entire city.
You've laid out the problem quite nicely. What I'll ask is we're probably going to plan to do this again before Election Day. If we could set some time aside to go a little more in depth in this issue,
sure,
and you can explain exactly how the city should combat this problem.
Yeah, well, the first thing they need to do is they need to redefine residential use. Because if you look at the zoning ordinance, I'm very familiar with the zoning ordinance because I was on the ZBA and I spent a lot of time with zoning and planning. And I have a great appreciation for a comprehensive plan and how important it is to our city. And as you look at the zoning ordinance and you look at definitions, there is not a good definition of what a residential use is. We need a good definition of residential use. And that would be a great way of making it more difficult for these kinds of uses to occur in really what should be primarily residential areas.
Good. Chris, here we are. This is September 18th. I think if my math's right, we're just over 7 weeks away from Election Day.
Yes.
How is the campaign going? Are you wearing out shoe leather? Are you attending a lot of events? Give me an overview of the campaign.
I'm trying to attend as many events as possible. I'm being interviewed by the PBA tonight, I've done that before. I will speak to anybody at any time. As a candidate without a large party behind me, without party organization, it's a lot harder. So I'm doing a lot of this myself. It's hard. It really is hard. It's not easy.
People have to go down the list.
I wore a lot of shoe leather. I wore a lot of shoe leather for the primaries, both getting signatures for the Democratic primary, as well as getting the one Saratoga on the ballot. I talked to a lot of people, and I have to say the number one concern that I came across was Ron Kim and the way he's handling the city council meetings. That was it. That was the biggest issue. It was time after time after time, people would come up to me and say, that's the problem. And they continue to. And so, there is that concern out there. And I think it's really important that people be given this alternative. I really love the idea of one Saratoga too, because it gives people another vehicle to be able to run. If you don't make it through the primary process of your party, you still have another avenue. And I think that people need to understand these are very valuable candidates. And it's also, this year it's Democrats and Republicans working together because Democrats and Republicans are sharing that ballot line.
Yes, and the theme "city over party" is terrific.
Exactly.
It really resonates with me. I'm sure it resonates with a lot of people.
As I said before, exactly. Most of these issues that are facing us are not Democrat issues or Republican party issues. Yeah. They are city issues. Yeah.
I said this to you offline before. I hope, regardless of what happens in this election, that one Saratoga remains constant, not just every 2 years, but 365 days a year in between cycles. I want them to be a force in this city with commentary and influence. I think that's important. It may counterbalance, and I hope the Republican Party picks up their game. And you're right about Mike Brandy. I think he's trying hard, and that's not a pro-Republican thing. If it was flipped around and the Democrats were very weak like the Republicans are, I want the Democrats to strengthen. So we have a two-party system and we have checks and balances, which to a large degree, we don't have right now.
Because we used to have a one-party system where the Republicans ran the city. When I was in the Democratic committee, the chances of electing a Democrat in the city were pretty low. I mean, Tommy McTighe was the exception. Every 2 years he was being reelected, but for the longest time, it was very, very hard to get a Democrat elected. And, when Ken Klotz came into office, first as finance commissioner, and then as mayor, and then Valerie Keene, and this list of Democrats who were successful, Ben Burling as the count. This was all new, but it sure made a change in the city for the better. Having a balance between both parties is very good. And I think you're absolutely right. I think it's important to reinvigorate the Republican Party So you do have more balance. Let's look at what's happening here. We have 5 positions on the council and the 2 supervisor positions, but only 2 of the council members are being challenged. The 3 other council members aren't. I think it would be better to have the opportunity to bring more people into the political process and get more points of view. And even if the incumbents continue to win, at least you have these ideas out there, and that can result in progress. That can move the city along. People change based upon the political climate they find themselves in, and I think things get pretty stodgy if people year after year are not opposed, have no opposition whatsoever. I've seen it happen in the past.
Well stated, Chris. I'm looking forward to. We're going to do this again, folks. At least once, maybe twice before the election. Chris, next time we'll go maybe a little more in depth into some topics if you wish. But I enjoyed this. I think it's important for the city. I hope you did too. Any last thoughts to the voters?
Well, yes. The last thoughts for the voters are: please become involved. Please pay attention. I think paying attention is important. The people who are paying attention, I think, are the people who should be voting and making their feelings known. People who are just voting along party lines, please don't. Please take a look at the issues, and please take a look at all 3 candidates before you make your decision.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Dan.